school committee is being conducted in a hybrid model. Before we begin, permit me to offer a few notes. First, this meeting is being conducted via Zoom, is being recorded, and is also being simultaneously broadcast on ACMi. Persons wishing to join the meeting by Zoom may find information on how to do so on the town's website. Persons participating by Zoom are reminded that they may be visible to others, and that if you wish to participate, you are asked to provide your full name in the interest of developing a record of the meeting. All participants are advised that people may be listening who do not provide comment, and those persons are not required to identify themselves. Both Zoom participants and persons watching on ACMi can follow the posted agenda materials also found on the town's website using the Novus Agenda platform. All right, our first item on our agenda this evening is public comment. Before we call our first speaker, I have a few ground rules. For members of the public who wish to address the committee, there will be 3 minutes of public comment. Depending on the number of people who sign up, time allotments may be reduced, but will not exceed 3 minutes each. I will let the speaker know when they have 30 seconds left. If the number of people who sign up exceeds what can be done in 20 minutes, the number of speakers may be capped and will be invited to speak at the next, based on the timestamp of their email or phone call to Ms. Diggins. The school committee respectfully requests participants of the public to utilize their camera if possible while speaking and to adhere to the public comment policy, BEDH, that requires participants to provide their name and address. Speakers may offer such objective criticisms of the school operations and programs as concern them, but in public session, the committee will not hear personal complaints about school personnel nor against any member of the school community, except for the school committee or the superintendent in their capacity as the operational leader of Arlington Public Schools. The public is reminded that the school committee does not hold jurisdiction over the performance of school personnel other than the superintendent. Additionally, the committee will not hear anything that might identify and or infringe upon a student's privacy by name or incident. So we have a few public speakers who I know have a shared topic. So I'm going to call all of them, and I know you're going to introduce yourselves and pass the mic. Kylie Berry-Smith, Kai Headland, Ethan Butler, and Chris Berry-Smith.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Chris Berry-Smith, 37 Silk Street in Arlington, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm here with Emily Butler and Peter Headland, 2 other parents involved in the Arlington High School cross-country ski club, and we all think, along with the student leaders that you're about to hear from, that it'd be a wonderful idea to make cross-country skiing an official sport at Arlington High School, and the student leaders will tell you why. So far, we're very happy to have the support of Principal Janger and Athletic Director Bowler, and tonight I hope that these young people will earn your support. So why don't you all come up? And we'll start with Kai Headland.
Hello, my name is Kai Headland. I'm a junior at Arlington High School, and I'm also a co-captain of the ski club. We are the ski club, or the Nordic skiing club, and we ski at Weston Ski Track, which is about 15 to 20 minutes away from here. They make snow there, which is really good for us because it allows us to expand our season, even in times like this where we don't have that much snow. We started skiing about mid-December, and we can go all the way till late March or even early April, depending on how long we have snow. Our ski club is 3 years old. This is our 3rd year. Every single year we've increased the amount of participants. Last year we had about 12 people, and this year we have 19 people. It's about split 50-50 between boys and girls, and also split about 50-50 between experienced skiers and new skiers. Now, Ethan Butler.
Yeah, I'm Ethan.
If you can just pass the microphone.
Yeah.
They'll move if you don't want
With the mic.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so I'm Ethan. I'm also a junior, and I've been skiing competitively for about 10 years. I learned, like many of my other teammates, with a youth program also at Weston Ski Track, which has been growing rapidly over the years and will continue to provide many skiers interested in continuing into high school. Our club practices on Thursday evenings and Saturday mornings, with an optional junior varsity and varsity race after school on Wednesday. Though we have been competing in it unofficially, becoming a varsity team would allow us to do so officially for Arlington High School, along with 20 other teams in Eastern Mass. Additionally, becoming a varsity team would allow our more experienced skiers to compete in an MIAA state championship race, where the best skiers from the state compete in a fun race at the end of the season. Overall, I would love to overall, skiing has been the bright point of my day for so many years, and I would love to share it with more people.
All right, thank you. My name is Kylie Berry Smith. I'm a junior at AHS and one of the co-captains of the Cross Country Ski Club. As a member and leader of this group who has been skiing with it since its inception 3 years ago, I have loved watching this group evolve. One thing that has stood out to me throughout my time in this club is the inclusive, supportive, and encouraging environment of this club and of high school cross-country skiing as a whole. As we have mentioned, there is a wide range of abilities on the team, and members of all levels are supported. If we become an official team, we would continue and expand our inclusivity and accessibility. Even as an official team, we hope to continue to be a no-cut sport, since this helps us create an atmosphere that is as competitive or as relaxed as an individual wants it to be. We also believe that becoming an official sport will make cross-country skiing more accessible to the high school community by decreasing barriers to student participation. Overall, we believe that an official cross-country ski team would be a beneficial addition to Arlington High School. We are appreciative of the opportunity to speak today. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
All right, I just want to thank you in advance of the meeting. You received a letter signed by a bunch of the parents and students involved so far, and Peter Hedlund also put together a photo array showing some of these skiers out at Weston. I don't think tonight's the night for questions, but if you ever have any, all the parents here are happy to help out with any of the information if this is new to you, as I expect it might be. And I have to add that we all know that in high school it's as much about the merch as it is the activity itself, and those are some of our club shirts that Ethan's sporting tonight. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
thank you. And yeah, and just so you know, for public comment, we listen, but we don't typically respond. The topic might come up later this evening. Somebody might reach out to you. Thank you all very much. All right, our next item on the agenda are our AHS student reps. Amy and Mo are here.
All right, so just to start off, our winter season of sports is like full-fledged. Everyone's doing great. The hockey team is crushing it, and all the sports are doing well as well. We just had a music technology concert, which went amazing, and where students got to like show off their work from the past term. And we also are planning some like school spirit days at the start of the next term. And I think overall the transition from winter break has been pretty smooth.
Right now we're trying to organize a blood drive, which is really exciting because we haven't been able to have one of those for a couple years because of COVID. So right now that's a pretty big focus.
Do you have a date?
Not yet. We're trying to work around senior prom.
Make sure the school committee secretary gets that so she can pass it to us, please. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. All right, next we have a field trip approval for a trip to Costa Rica at OMS from April 13th to April 20th, 2024. Dr. Homan.
So I know we have Mr. Zirk here and also Mr. Maringer to answer any questions about this particular trip. I also want to state that I've been somewhat challenged in thinking about some of these trips that we take internationally, particularly at the middle school level. And I would really like, and I've shared this with Mr. Maringer and also with Mr. Jenger, for us to more proactively put together a plan for how we're thinking about travel at the middle level. One of my concerns about this was cost and accessibility, and so I have spoken with the organizer of this trip, Ms. Murnick, about having a lottery system for getting into the trip, and also ways that we can make sure that it's an equitable opportunity for any student who wants to go is able to go on this trip, and I'm sure she'd be more than willing to report on what the plans are for that moving forward. I'm not sure they have that worked out just yet. I also think that we need to have some lower cost options and perhaps more options for students to go on excursions, but we're going to need a longer term vision for what secondary travel looks like. This is a trip that's established. We've gone on it we've gone on a trip to either Belize or Costa Rica every couple of years since 2017. And because of that, and because this is an established practice, we've brought this proposal forward, but not without the desire to do a little bit of proactive work moving forward, thinking through what our philosophy is around travel and how we make sure that travel is widely accessible to all of our students if they should choose to do things like this. This is also school adjacent. This is not a school trip, and it's important that messaging around this trip emphasize that. It's not necessarily a school-sponsored trip. It's something that the school facilitates families signing up for and that peers will go on. And I think we need to work out what that messaging will be in the coming weeks. So if you have any additional questions, Mr. Zirk and Mr. Behringer are here to answer them.
Mr. Manager, do you want to give a little information, or you?
So I will probably turn it over to Mr. Zirk. So this is, when I became the principal 5 years ago, Mr. Zirk's a retired teacher at the middle school, and he's been running these trips for quite some time. Miss Murnick is also someone who's been running these trips. But it's really something that's, as Dr. Holman said, is kind of like middle school adjacent. It's really something that there's been a couple of teachers who have decided to take a group of students to various places. They advertise it to the students sign up, and the trip goes, as planned. But it's not something that really I've been involved with any of the planning or kind of the determination of the destination. So Mr. Zirk, I'm sure, could talk to you a little bit more about kind of the history of the program and how it's happened. Tom, you want to speak to
that? Liz, I apologize, but I could not hear a lot of what you said to the group. It's not coming through. I don't think Casey heard it very well. Or Seth was shaking her head. So I don't know if you can repeat just some of the highlights of what you said to the group, but use your computer so we can hear you.
I cannot turn on my computer microphone because it will create.
Tom, can you hear me?
I can hear you pretty well, yes. Brian.
Okay. I think if I could paraphrase what Dr. Holman said, is that this is a trip that has taken part for a few years, but it's something we need to look at. It's school adjacent and really not something run by the schools. And as we look forward to having these trips continue, we need to look at whether everyone is eligible to take these trips, whether the cost is prohibited for some people not being able to go, and also whether international trips opposed to trips within the United States makes some sense. So I think what we're looking to have you present is just kind of a little bit of the history, why you go various places, and are there affordable options for kids who this might be a stretch financially. Dr. Holman, is that a good enough paraphrasing?
Yes. Tom, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, a very, very brief history of this. Jen started travel, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, Jen Murnick, and then was unable to travel 1 year because of having a baby. And so I took it over, and at that point had contacted EF. We had a meeting with Dr. Bodie. This was probably in 2017, 2016, somewhere then. The first trip we did was to Costa Rica. I believe that was 2016. We ran that trip with 16 students. The next year we went to Belize. There were, I believe, 18 students on that. And then 2019, we went back to Costa Rica. We had 24 students. 2020, we had planned to go back to Belize. Obviously, that didn't happen. When the trips did start opening back up, we had a meeting a year ago fall, I believe, Casey. A year ago fall, we weren't sure what kind of a reaction we would get, how many people would be interested in going. Like I said, the biggest number of students we had was 24. We had over 100 families at the informational meeting on Zoom. We opened it up to 36 spots. Those sold out in 7 minutes. And Jen and I spoke the next day, and we opened up the trip, decided to run basically 2 trips, two full buses, and open it up. And I believe there's 72 students signed up at this point, so it's pretty much full. I don't know what else I can answer. Jen can't be here because she's got parent conferences tonight. However, it was my understanding that a number of these issues that have just been brought up as far as who's eligible for the trips, financial equity issues, that those had been previously discussed. So I was not privy to any of those. I retired in 2018, so I no longer even teach at Odison. But I do show my face there regularly, as Brian knows. So I'm not sure how much more information I can give you at this point. Casey, I'm not sure if you want to jump in at this point, answer any of those, but I'm not sure what else I can say.
I can chime in. Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. I'm Casey Youngentub. I'm manager of Team New England at EF. So I'm working with the Torkin student Charlie, who works with Arlington Public Schools, planning these trips. So from an EF perspective, in terms of affordability, we do encourage families and schools to be able to plan early so they have can take full advantage of our automatic payment plan. So that allows families to split up monthly payments just like they would a telephone bill, and being able to make it more affordable. For any families that this is something that may feel more like a stretch, we do have
I'm going to stop you.
coordination page. So once a student enrolls, everyone will have access to a page, sort of like a GoFundMe, but it's through EF, so we don't take any of the percentage, we don't take any of the cost. It goes straight towards the cost of their trip. And a lot of students, especially middle schools, have had a lot of success. We also have a Global Citizen Scholarship that I would encourage every student to apply to be able to get $1,000 towards the cost of their tour. And that's something we can talk more just about. We've had 2 winners in New England in this year, but more than happy to answer any questions. But that's a little bit in terms of the affordability piece from an EF perspective.
I will add to that,
okay, wait, can you, hold on. Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Barely.
Sort of.
With either.
It's a little bit garbled unless you're talking right into one of the microphones, I think.
Yeah, no, I am talking into a microphone. You can't hear me?
Sort of.
Can you hear me, Tom?
That's better. Yeah, Brian, I can hear you.
Okay, I will relay any of the information.
Okay.
Move to our discussion.
Well, yes, I'd like to move to discussion, but I don't know.
We're going to move to discussion.
The microphones aren't on.
So we're going to move to a discussion quickly. So we'll be right with you.
Yeah. Okay. We'll see if maybe your mics work. Who would like to say something? Miss Morgan.
So I think this is a very expensive.
Can we make sure they can hear you? Sorry.
I mean, I think we've lost that part, right? I don't think
so we're going to
be able to. I think it's just going to be us. All right. So I mean, I think this is a very expensive trip.
Sorry, can I hold? Stop for a second.
My worry is that
can the people at home watching this on ACMi hear us with these mics?
He's working on it.
Well.
So do we need to take a recess?
Let's see.
And would they be able to hear us on the replay?
Mm-hmm. That's an important piece too, yeah.
You have to start the whole thing.
It's not the masks.
No, it's not I'm not wearing a mask, and Jane's not wearing a mask, and they can't understand us.
We're up against the microphone. It's not the.
You know, he doesn't see the mouse.
He's working on it.
Can you take a 10-minute break?
Yeah. We're going to take a 10-minute recess. All right, we are coming back from our recess. I'm going to have this discussion about the field trip move to questions and comments from the committee. Miss Morgan.
Okay, great. I guess I'll say how I feel about it because I don't think it will. So I guess my first question is how. So Dr. Homan, you said that we were going to make this trip available to access, like financially available to anybody who wants to go. So how that's what.
Yes.
That's. So how are we going to do that?
We have a scholarship fund. We've used it for high school trips. And in the event we have students who are interested in going on this trip who we know are going to be financially strained by doing so, we can set up a scholarship fund for this trip. And I'm going to work with Ms. Murnick on figuring out what the logistics of that look like. We've done it before for other trips, the high school. And I've also talked with Ms. Murnick about having a lottery set up for sign up for this trip once it's approved. I think those two things are strategies we've used with trips in the past that have made access a little more equitable for our students. I still think there are barriers to students attending trips like this, even with those two things in place. Obviously, it was a $10,000 scholarship fund that we had set up for trips at the high school. We can do a similar scholarship fund for trips we can do for this trip. This is the only trip at Audison. This year, I am skeptical that much of it would be used for this trip, but it is a possibility that we can do this year. I don't, we need to think about long-term sustainability of things like that and what kinds of trips we offer so that if we do set up a scholarship fund, it can be accessed for students for different opportunities, not just one at the middle school level. But that's what we would do. That's how we would do that. I don't have details worked out with Ms. Murnick on exactly how it would be implemented yet.
Okay, so we would have to approve it without knowing any of those details.
Yep.
Got it. Okay, so, this is a very expensive trip. It's $3,300. There may be some mechanism for financial aid. EF is a privately held for-profit company, and as a district, we do market these trips to the parents of our kids. And while I don't think the intention is to be this way, the perception from families is that these are very much class trips. And I appreciate that we're being told that they're school adjacent, but this is one of those situations where we can message it as well as we possibly can. And I can tell you as the parent of middle schoolers that the perceptions of families is that they're very much the class trip. Mm-hmm. So I generally think international travel is good for students. We want to provide opportunities, but these trips provide opportunities to the kids of families who can pay. And they have to be able to pay quite a lot. And those are kids who already have a lot of opportunities. And we also have no other trips on offer at the middle school level. When I was in middle school, I went to Seattle. I lived in Eugene, Oregon, so it wasn't as far as here. And we took a school bus and we slept on a gym floor. I actually thought it was great. My public school teacher parents could afford it. They could pay my nominal fee. At St. Agnes School in Arlington, they take middle school students to Washington, D.C. for $700. We just offer these really extravagant international trips for middle schoolers. And if we're walking the talk about equity in schools, these sort of junkets for affluent middle school kids just can't be the norm and the only option that our kids have. I appreciate the effort that has been made to put it together. I appreciate, the work, the tradition behind it. And I understand why kids and parents and teachers want to go. But ultimately having one trip available to kids that costs over $3,000 and that's the only option, there's just no place for that in a district that sees itself as being an equitable educational community. So I'm going to vote no. I think that we really need to look at middle grade trips in general, and I think the only way it seems that that's going to happen is if we, make a move to move away from these kind of really, really expensive trips. So that's my position. Thank you.
Mr. Hayner.
Could you explain to me the difference between adjacent and sponsored? Is there a difference?
Because we are using school-based, the parents sign up through EF. EF is organizing the trip. We are not organizing the trip. The teacher is going on the trip as a chaperone. EF organizes all aspects of the trip.
So why does it require our approval then?
It is a trip that my take on this is it's a trip that we are advertising through our systems to families and that we host information sessions about in our facilities and that is only open to Arlington Public Schools students for this particular organized trip. And so it qualifies, by my reading of the field trip policy, for approval by the school committee.
Does this equate to liability on our part as a school department?
Because the parents sign off on all of the liability aspects of the trip, the consent and everything else through EF, no.
Thank you.
Dr. Allison-Ampe.
While I agree with many things that Ms. Morgan has stated, I'm not sure, at least when mine were in middle school, it was seen as the school trip, but it is something where it's offering opportunities to people who have the means to afford them. There wasn't as, I'm not sure there was any financial aid when I was doing it. So, I mean, when we were there a few years ago. So that's good, but I am concerned that this is a really big trip, and I hope as we come up with our policies, we need to be thinking actually not just of middle school, but also high school. You know, how are we doing these trips, and how are we ensuring equitable access to all of our students? And I think I'm still thinking about how I'm going to vote. I haven't decided yet. So thank you.
Mr. Thielman?
I'm going to vote in favor of this. Because this has been a long-standing trip that has gone well and has benefited kids in Arlington. And so I certainly appreciate all that's been said about equity and access to the trip and the challenges it presents to families who may not even try to get on the trip because of the cost. And so, but I think the best thing is for the district, for all of us, the school committee and the district leadership, to step back and maybe come up with some policies and strategies for how we want to address these trips going forward, rather than make a decision about policy based on through this trip, through a vote on this trip. I don't think we should make a decision on policy through this vote. That's my opinion.
Mr. Schlickman?
No, I agree with Mr. Thielman. I was with one of our trips that was basically sponsored by the Sister City program, and went to our sister city, Nagaoka in Japan. And I could see what a life-changing experience was for the students who were there. And that's sort of behind my saying, yeah, anytime we've got an opportunity for kids to go someplace internationally and see the world in a different way, I think it's very important that we're able to do that. But we've had discussions in the past, partially in terms of, do we want to do this through school or do we want to do this through community ed? I don't know what the answer is. I really hate anything being exclusive, and the cost does put us in that territory. But I don't know how to fix it, and I don't want to say no and stop it. So in that context, I'm going to vote yes, and hopefully maybe we can think of ways to make our trips a little more equitable.
Would someone like to make a motion to approve?
I move approval of the trip.
Second. Okay.
We have a motion by Mr. Thielman, seconded by Mr. Schlickman. Those in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Opposed?
Hey.
I'm going to
Abstentions? Sorry. So.
4 yes, 2 no, 1 abstain.
Thank you. Did you get that? Okay. That motion passes.
So the motion carries.
Yes. Yes, the motion passes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Student Services Department Introduction and Entry Activities. Ms. Elmer.
Great. I'm just going to test this. People can hear me, correct?
You might move your mic.
Yeah,
a little
bring it. I
closer
think you're
to
going to
your-
have to bring
yeah.
it closer.
The mask
I was
is
the
on.
one person you could hear perfectly before. See, can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you. Gonna share this. All right, thank you. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to briefly introduce myself to folks who have not had to work with me in any capacity associated with special education. So just to give a little background about myself, I began as a special ed teacher before becoming a school-based administrator, and then moving on to the director of student services in the Reading Public Schools before I came to Arlington in 2014, in which position I served as the director of special education until this year with our reorganization under a student services model. And so we are beginning a reorganization of the department and other departments, as we've heard in.
Sorry, Miss Elmer.
Is your flag floated on your screen?
It is.
Oh.
I'll start and do that again. So, can you see that now?
Yep.
But when I do the slideshow, can you see it?
No.
It
No.
tries to load.
So that's the issue. I can do it through this if you want.
Yeah,
I know
might
it's
as
not
well.
the best view, but. So you heard me though, you just didn't see me, correct? All right, so I will continue. So we began with a reorganization process for a student services department, which currently includes special education, nursing, and school counseling. As the district continues to reorganize other departments as well, there may be some shifting of additional departments under the student services umbrella, but currently this is our department structure. Within that, the director of nursing, director of school counseling and social emotional learning, as well as the special education coordinators, special ed financial manager, and the senior clerks that have been part of the special ed department. In this shift to a broader umbrella, I was asked to create an entry plan that will help inform further the organization as well as some goals for the department under this larger umbrella. In the attachment that you have in Novus, there's also an entry plan as well, with our goals being to meet more directly with school counseling and the nursing department staffs, as well as the directors of each of these departments to understand the challenges and opportunities that exist within those departments, as well as I've mentioned, the opportunities for collaboration under a larger student services umbrella, as well as to deepen the understanding of the needs of community members and the delivery of services from all three of those departments, but what are the opportunities for greater collaboration. So I mentioned I've been here since 2014. This entry plan is going to be informed by some of those activities that I already do in my previous role, which include the school visits and classroom observations, as well as learning walks that we as a group of district administrators have begun to engage in the last year and a half, as well as my regular meetings with building principals and administrative team meetings, as well as those direct report meetings. And Steve and Julie Keys know we also have a joint committee of the AEA and special education that has been in place for at least 4 or 5 years, as well as the work with the CPAC. In addition to that, I'm going to engage in, or have already begun to engage in the community forums that were held in the fall, since some of the equity report spoke specifically to special ed concerns and the needs of community members around the work that we have to do in that department, as well as beginning to attend the board meetings that are held with AEA and our central office, the instructional leadership teams, which you've heard about to some degree, and some of the work with the school improvement plans, as well as now meeting regularly with the director of nursing and school counseling. You're going to hear shortly, following this, about our tiered focus monitoring review, which is an in-depth look at our special ed policies, procedures, and practices, and conducting listening sessions with some focus groups, as well as empathy interviews. As I mentioned, some of this work has already begun as part of that ongoing work that I already do, and as we head into the winter, we'll start shifting to those listening sessions and interviews, and then in the spring, synthesizing that information and reporting to the community. And just briefly, a mention of, who are those stakeholder groups that we've identified, as well as the interview folks. Are there questions?
Mr. Carden.
Thank you. So when the director of counseling and SEL was here, and I know we now have an interim, but I know we now have an interim, so I don't know to what extent you discussed this with her before she went on leave, but she expressed some concern and some difficulty of the dual role. Mm-hmm. So she was both the director of guidance and the curriculum director for social and emotional learning in the district. Everybody else who does curriculum is under the other assistant superintendent. So have you thought about that role, and is that an issue? Is that going to be an issue going forward? How do you see that problem?
Sure. So I think in the budget presentation you will hear some requests specifically about that. It is a concern that has surfaced at least for the last 2 or 3 years, and we haven't been able to support that in the budget. But yes, that is something that we will be addressing.
Great. Thank you.
Anybody else? Dr. Allison-Ampe?
I guess what I'm hoping to hear, can you hear me?
I can. It's more that I can't hear you in here.
It's like Zoom, except you can't increase my volume. What I'm hoping to hear, I guess later for your synthesis, is what do you see, what's your vision for the department? What do you hope to bring to our students? I mean, I'm assuming since it's student services, that that's like our primary focus. And I'd like to hear, as you develop this plan, I'd really like to hear a robust explanation of how this new department is helping push their experience forward. And I understand what you're doing, but I hope we can hear more about what's happening with the students, and how your department is going to be making their learning experience improved and I want to say more fun, but a better experience.
Sure, and I think also a lot of this work will tie in with the strategic plan, and there will be a lot of overlap between, I see, to answer a little bit of your question to Mr. Cardin around our multi-tiered systems of support, and thinking about SEL as both a curricular and a social emotional component, which is a part of an MTSS structure. So I'm understanding that that is not a question that you have right now. That's something that you want to hear. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
And then I'm just going to share my screen for the
TFM report. So the the next item on our agenda is the tiered focus monitoring report, which was completed in November, I believe. And so Ms. Elmer will give us an update on the report back from that.
All right. So let's try this. You can see that. Can you see it when I do the slideshow? No. Okay. So we'll just leave it at that. Tiered focus monitoring. About 3 years ago, we presented Cycle B. As just a reminder, this was formerly called Coordinated Program Review. The last time we did what was the full cycle was 6 years ago. They have since changed the process since we had that full review, and now have broken it up into Group A and Group B. But it is every 3 years, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, it has on-site components for reviewing the district's policies, practices, and procedures with special education, civil rights, and English learner education. There is a separate office that oversees English language education, so that would be a separate report that comes back. This particular review covered civil rights and special education. It's the Group A, it has a larger focus on special ed. Group B has a larger focus on civil rights. And so this process actually began last year in January through July, in which we did our self-assessment and internal record review, and then continued this year on site in November. So that self-assessment included also what had previously been another part of the district, the DESE's review, which was known as indicator submission. They have now brought the indicator process, which is federal reporting indicators, into this TFM process. So in addition to the targeted standards that they look at, they also ask for these submission of indicator 11, 12, and 13. In the self-assessment, we review 17 student records, or 15 student records rather, at a very in-depth process, and then there's an additional number of records that we're reviewing for these indicators, as well as policies and procedures regarding these universal standards. Indicator 11 measures our timelines for determining initial special ed eligibility. So that's when a student is first assessed for eligibility for special ed. We reviewed 79 additional records to those 15 records I mentioned. Indicator 12, which looks at transition for students ages 3 to, or rather age 3 from early intervention, and we looked at 16 additional records. And then indicator 13, which is transition for students aged 14 and above, and we had to review 35 additional records. This is just a snapshot of those universal standards. I realize that's a lot of text for you to see, but you can see that these are primarily SE is special ed, CR is civil rights. So in this case, we reviewed 3 civil rights standards as well. And in addition to the universal standards, they then look at more targeted standards. You can see again, special ed and civil rights. In addition to that self-assessment we did last winter and spring, they then come on-site and do on-site monitoring and reporting. I briefly mentioned this in the fall, that they were coming on-site, in which they would interview administrators, instructional and support staff, as well as our CPAC chairs. Any parent is free to request an interview. We publicized that in many forums, as well as having a virtual session to explain the program review process with our DESE reps. 2 people requested interviews, and they conducted 2 interviews. Additionally, surveys go out to all the parents of students with disabilities. They used to just do it with the selected records. Those individuals would get surveys. They now send them to all eligible families, and 207 surveys were returned, which they consider a decent response. And then when they come on site, they pull 12 additional student records for further review to both verify our own self-assessment and then additional records. I mentioned they were here in November and spent 3 days in the district. They also, Cycle B has more of the physical plant that they observe, but they did want to view timeout rooms. Typically, the DESE targets certain focus areas in their reviews cycles, so this one was looking at timeout rooms, in which they visited the one we have and then interviewed the staff that were involved with that. Once they complete the review, you are then given compliance ratings regarding your implementation. Our findings were that the district was found to be in compliance with all of those targeted and additional criteria reviewed, and that there was no corrective action identified. If you recall, in the past, we have had several findings. Starting back in 2006, we had 35 findings. In 2011, we had 22, and oops, sorry, went beyond. In our most recent full cycle review, which would have been the equivalent of cycle A in 2016, we had 13 findings. So, you know, we have continued to make progress on that. The one area that we did, the indicator data, which I mentioned are those federal indicators, we did have one area of non-compliance that was identified in the spring, in which we have corrected, and that was the indicator 11 reporting, which was our initial evaluation timeline. So from the time that signed consent is received, we have 30 school days to conduct an assessment, 45 working school days to hold a meeting. So as I mentioned, there were 79 records reviewed. And the thing is, I have my notes here, but my little thing is also covering it now. And so I could tell you exactly. 70 of those were found to be in compliance, while 9 were out of that timeline. 4 of those had they were excused because there was parent agreement, and there were 5 records that did not meet the compliance deadline out of the 79. One of those being the need to find a bilingual evaluator, and the other 4 meetings failed to meet the required timelines because the meeting was on the 46th day rather than the 45th day. And I'm sorry, because that now blocks your screen, doesn't it? Oh. You can find the full report at the DESE website. I've also shared it on our district website. We do not get, because there were no findings, we do not get the report that we had in the previous reviews, because there is nothing to correct at this time. So you can find the report there or on the special ed website. Thank you.
Questions or comments from the committee? Mr. Hayner?
I think you said 4 were not in compliance?
5 were not in compliance for indicator 11.
Okay.
4 of those were because the meeting was held on the 46th day instead of the 45th day. And the additional record was because we were looking for a bilingual evaluator.
Does DESE come back to you and say that you're now in compliance, or?
Yes, so this happened in the spring,
right.
And with this process, they want you to get into compliance prior to completing the review. So we did additional training with staff around the 46th day versus the 45th day, which was an error in counting. The DESE issued guidance about how they would like us to handle the situation if we can't find an evaluator. So staff were trained, and that was the corrective action, and then we'll submit 5 progress records just to show.
You will then eventually have a document saying you're in full compliance?
So we are currently in full compliance.
Right.
So this will just be the progress report. It's already considered corrected. This is just the progress reporting, and there won't be another public document for that because it's just internal reporting to the state.
Thank you.
Dr. Allison Ampe?
I'm not sure if this is a comment for you or to pass on to DESE when they're doing this, but I saw a copy of the survey request email, and it needs to come with more information. It was kind of hard to tell it was actually an official email. It didn't have enough it didn't have enough information around, it just sort of showed up and said, here, the family's supposed to fill out a survey for this, but there was no way to tell from the email that it was actually official, and there was nothing from the school to say this is coming beforehand.
Dr. Holman announced it in her notice to the community. It's also on the special ed page, and then when both at the CPAC and when the DESE came, we proposed it. We advertised a Zoom in which people could come and learn about the process. So there was notification. If I understand if folks were not aware, I can give the feedback to the DESE because we actually provide the email addresses of eligible students to those families.
Yeah, I think there needs to be something, because if people miss those channels, there wasn't something that came through the same channel that the email did.
Could you send me what you got
Sure.
that felt like it didn't have as much context around it, just so I
Yeah.
can, because
Yeah,
I know that we
okay.
sent through multiple streams, and I just would need to see exactly which email.
Yeah.
Mr. Cardin?
Thank you. So I want to congratulate you and your staff on a clean report. Last time, when we'd had a lot of findings, I was rather critical. I asked for a root cause analysis, if you recall.
I recall.
And there was some a sort of vague response, but whatever the root cause was, we've solved it, and that's a terrific accomplishment. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have a question around the civil rights piece. I'm curious if bullying is ever addressed. I'm just in the process or in a different process. I'm just curious where.
Sure. So Dr. McNeil's not here tonight, so he can't speak to the components that he contributed. But as I mentioned, there's cycle A and cycle B, which replace that full cycle versus the mid-cycle. And so in cycle B, it's much more intensive with the civil rights under which bullying falls. And so you have to understand these are also policy and procedure reviews. So it is an update of our policies and procedures that we submit to them for approval.
don't know if you want to say
So
anything.
we had, when we did Cycle B last year, they based it on a review of documents that had occurred pre-pandemic. So basically they got all of our documents before the pandemic in 2019, and the review was for that time period. It was supposed to happen in 2020, and then they actually looked in 2021 at documents that they had grabbed. And when they looked at the documents they had grabbed in 2021, our bullying intervention and prevention policy was within the 2 years of being reviewed because it was 2021. And then in an ongoing sense, you know, events can come up that can cause DESE to go and look at our policies and procedures. That happens as part of an internal process for problem resolution with the DESE, and that they discovered that we hadn't gone in within 2 years from the 2019 date that was on our policy at the time to update it in 2021, even though they had done the review in 2021 and not flagged anything. So we've recently upped that. They will, in Cycle B, look at the compliance of our bullying policy and implementation of it, and did, and found us to be in compliance at the time. And we've had a lot of challenges with things like bullying this year. And I'm happy to have Dr. McNeil or our legal counsel report on some of the actions we're taking proactively. And we actually had a lengthy conversation with principals today about some of the things that they're seeing at schools, some of the support that they would like to have, some of the things that we would want to be more consistent about in terms of our practice around bullying in the schools. And we're doing some training in late January and early February that's been planned all year with our legal counsel surrounding bullying practices, investigations, and responses. So it's definitely something we're taking a close look at because it's been a challenge as we've come back from the pandemic, and we're happy to share a report on that at some point if you'd like.
Thank you. Real? All right. Next, we are going to hear about the strategic plan and some sample initiatives. Dr. Homan?
All right. Hold on a second. So good evening. I am pleased to bring you an update on where we are at with the development of our strategic plan. And Mr. Anderson, who's been helping us with the process, is also here in case there are process-based questions. I'm happy to answer any content-based questions. You have in your materials several documents that are strategic plan documents. What was agreed upon at the CIAA subcommittee meeting prior to the break was that we would provide at today's meeting not a draft of the full plan, which the team very much appreciated because it took us quite a bit of time to get these documents together, but some draft initiatives from each of the priority areas, as well as the needs assessment statement for each of the priority areas. So what we have tonight, I'm going to go through the structure of the plan. I'm going to talk through strategic priority 1 and the sample initiative we have for that, strategic priority 2 needs and the example for that, strategic priority 3, 4, and then we can talk about any questions that you might have. I want to start by outlining a structure of the plan and just sort of explain how the plan is laid out and what you will receive when you ultimately see the full plan. So as we've discussed several times, there's one vision and mission developed and approved by the school committee last spring, as well as 4 priority areas developed and approved by the school committee last spring. Beneath each of those 4 priority areas, this is the work that's been happening this fall, there are 3 initiatives each. These are large-scale, big-scope work we want to do, basically initiative areas that we want to focus on as part of these 4 strategic priorities. Not to say that there won't be work that falls outside of these priorities that we will also need to address, but to say that when we're thinking about budgeting, when we're thinking about where we put our time and our resources, this helps be a guidepost for us to make decisions about whether or not the work we're doing is helping one of these initiatives move forward, and if not, maybe we can deprioritize it. So we're going to talk about today 1.1, which is instructional vision and coherence, 2.3, which is competitive compensation, 3.3, which is enhanced facilities stewardship, and 4.2, which is welcome center and registration. We are working on the remaining 8 initiatives and getting those to you as soon as possible. So for each priority area, there is a needs assessment, and you have the draft needs assessments in your materials. If there are additional bits of data that you would like to see included in the needs assessments or adjustments to the way we have sort of framed the need, we're more than happy to take that feedback. In priority area one, this is the sort of, I would say, linchpin priority. It all leads back to teaching and learning, everything we do in the system. So in thinking about priority one and the 3 initiatives there, we've identified some focal groups, and the focal groups weave through the entire strategic plan. We work to have as much information about each of these focal groups in the needs assessment as we can. That said, some of our data and assessment practices need to be refined, which is actually part of 1.1. And so we don't have data for every single focal group for every single initiative. And in the places where there are gaps there, you should see a nod in the action strands to begin collecting and tracking some of those data. So our 5 focal groups of stakeholders over the next 5 years are the students and families and teachers of students who have IEPs, the students, families, and staff who identify as Black and or Hispanic Latino, the students, families, and staff who identify as LGBTQIA+, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersexual, and asexual plus. Students who are multilingual learners, also known as English learners, and their families, as well as students whose families speak a language other than English at home as their primary language, and students and families who are low income. For each of those focal groups, we've done some gap analysis on academics, and the graphs that you see are ones that we hope will be mirrored in school improvement plans moving forward when we report out on academic outcomes. So the way that these are generated is to say, what is the percent of students who are meeting and exceeding standards in these different academic areas? And it is meant to represent all students. So if you're looking at low income and students who are not identified as low income, that's all students. You either are identified or are not as low income. Same is true for our English language learners or multilingual learners. Same is true for our students who are African American or Black. They are compared against all students so that we can make sure we're representing all students in the graph. This is a depiction of what the gap is so that we can assess whether or not we are closing it. In the outcomes for strategic priority area 1, you will see an articulation of how much we intend to close the gap each year. The truth, though, is that we want to close the gap entirely. We also know that it's unrealistic to set a goal in 5 years to close that gap entirely. So initiative 1.1 is tied to instructional vision and coherence. It has action strands beneath it. So each initiative has an action strand or multiple within it. That action strand includes the major actions we think we're going to take over 5 years. Sometimes we'll say these actions are going to take place in years 3 to 5, but we're not saying exactly which year. It also includes outcomes. So the 4 action strands for Initiative 1.1 are listed there, and our outcomes are to improve the academic achievement of students, particularly for our focal groups compared to their peers over the 5 years, as measured by assessments, benchmark assessments, performance tasks. So in the document for 1.1, you'll see how we're defining how we're going to close that gap and the specific percentages. We have key academic areas that are tied to our action plan for 1.1 that we're going to focus on for swifter closure of gaps. So for example, we're rolling out a new 3 to 5 curriculum. Our goal in grades 3 to 5 ELA is to close the gap by 5% over all of those years, as opposed to only 3%, which we're saying we want to do for all academic areas. It's a very ambitious goal, but it's one that we feel we need to strive for and work towards and track our progress towards. And we're really trying to make sure that in those areas where we're trying to accelerate progress, it's the areas where we know we have actions planned in the next 5 years that we think will have a positive impact on student outcomes. Priority 2 is linked to valuing all staff. You see some similar graphs to the ones for priority area 1 in the needs assessment. Our goal is to support a staff that's going to reflect the demographics and experiences of the student population, build on some of the strengths of some of our revised models of professional learning. What you see on the right here are some of the positive results we've had in the fall panorama survey regarding staff's responses to questions about professional development. We made a change, we saw an impact. So that's a really good sign that some of the adjustments we've already made are having a positive impact, and we want to keep building on those strengths. And we also, in priority area 2, want to recruit and retain with competitive compensation and benefits. You have 2.3, which is the competitive compensation initiative in your materials. The action strands for that one are to refine and track our strategies for recruitment and retention, and to establish and sustain competitive compensation compared to our Town Manager 12 peer communities. We also have some goals in that particular initiative linked to increasing staff diversity to mirror the student body and closing the gap when it comes to the representation of teachers and staff members who help our students see themselves in the people who teach and work with them every day. Priority area 3 is linked to operations. You can see in the needs assessment for that one that we're really focused on a few key areas. One is making sure that our facilities are up to date and well maintained, using our systems such as our maintenance ticket systems, our asset management systems to more efficiently manage some of the things that we have available to us, to build the sustainability of our buildings and the efficiency of our buildings with some of the new technology that we have available. And we're also focused in this one on student meals and making sure that they continue to be accessible and delicious for all of our students every day, and doing some improvements to our school meal program now that we have such a huge uptick in participation thanks to meals being free of charge for students. The action strands for the initiative you have in front of you tonight is the Facilities Stewardship Initiative. There are 3 action strands for that. One is to set some standards based on stakeholder feedback for what our building's performance should look like, use our asset management and maintenance systems with consistent processes, and use data to assess preventative maintenance needs, and make a phased improvement plan for all of our buildings using the budgetary mechanisms available to us, including capital planning as well as some of our revolving funds. Our outcomes for this one are to ensure that when we put in a ticket, when we have a need, it's addressed, that we are able to address needs proactively, and that we have a phased plan for making improvements to our schools for doing regular maintenance like painting or adjusting floors or making repairs, and that we're really proactively thinking about when we need to make adjustments based on student enrollment, which is something we've already been working on. Priority 4 is focused on partnerships with our families. You can see from the graphs that while we have made some positive progress with regards to family-school communication over the past couple of years, we still have some pretty significant gaps, particularly for our families of transgender youth and our other focal group areas. So the goals and the needs in Priority 4, which leads to the initiatives and some of our goals, are to streamline and centralize our communication and registration systems in order to improve our family experiences and expand our access to really enriching programming like our before and after school programming, and perhaps including some additional extracurricular programming. Who knows, maybe Nordic skiing. And the initiative you have in front of you is the Welcome Center and Registration Initiative. That has 3 action strands attached to it. One is to assign leadership and staff, because we don't currently have a welcome center, but the new building is slated to have one. To develop materials and opportunities for families to engage with and learn about the district, perhaps around important topics that are coming up in the community, and have a space and opportunity for families to share what they need with us and for us to share resources with them. Our outcomes linked to this are to ensure that families new to the district are satisfied with their enrollment experience, that we demonstrate significant improvement over 5 years for our focal groups, and particularly that families who don't speak English as their primary language feel more connected to the schools in the district, as reported on our climate surveys and in our LPAC meetings. And one of the things we do know that we need to work on from our TFM report is a sustained LPAC, because it's been something that's been difficult for the district to get up and running and sustain. So that's something I'm hoping that with a Welcome Center and a Director of Communication and Family Engagement in partnership with our English Learner Department, we're going to be able to get moving and keep moving. So that was a lot of words. I'm happy to take any questions, comments, or adjustments that you'd like to see to the documents you have for tonight.
Mr. Thielman?
Dan, it's good to see you. Go over and say hello. I just want to say it was a great process to be a part of, and I was on Planning Committee 4, which got very high ratings and reviews from all of the press covering us. But it was a really good process, and it was a thoughtful process. There were a lot of good conversations. It was well facilitated and well run by Dan Anderson. And I think it's given us a good framework for where we want to go as a district. And it's given us a good framework for budget discussions. And I'm really glad Dr. Holman did this in her second year and gets us off to a good start over the next couple of years.
Mr. Schlickman?
Yeah, I can't describe how impressed I am with the documentation that I've seen. This is an extraordinarily well done structure of a strategic plan, and the elements that have been brought in are very, very well presented. I view it as an exemplary piece of work, and I have to commend both our consultant, the superintendent, and all the people in Arlington who worked on it. It's just much. I've worked on these. I've not seen one as good as what I see emerging from here. Well done.
Thank you.
Let me ask you one silly question.
Mm-hmm.
The ticket system for buildings is sort of a tangent. Do the Pierce mice have the ability to load a ticket?
Probably at this point. I'm not sure how to respond to that.
Moving on. Mr. Cardin.
Thank you. Yes, I'm glad you've gone through this effort and applaud it as well. I guess one question is sort of the next steps and what is the timeline for those steps?
Yep. So right now, I'm sorry, I should have included that as a slide. We are working on the final 8. They are in good shape. I just need to do a couple more rounds through them with the team and make sure that we're happy with how the strands are articulated. Some of them were particularly challenging for the group that was building them because they didn't necessarily have all the context of a school system to know what the numbers were for funding. So that's some of the final details we're working out now. My hope is to have a full draft of the plan to you by the next meeting, so the remaining 8 initiatives, as well as a layout in sort of spreadsheet form of the total cost each year based on what we were able to project into the plan. That said, as you noticed in some of the initiatives, some of the items are TBD in terms of how much they would cost, so that's going to be a very rough cost out of how much the plan would cost. And then my hope would be that when actually the same meeting that we're proposing a budget, we're also proposing a final version of the plan.
Okay, so my only comment is I appreciate that there's been a lot of people participating in this, but I still think that once the plan comes out, it would be good for both the full staff and the community to marinate on it a little bit. Okay. Have an opportunity to give feedback in writing or at a forum, whatever you prefer, just in case there's something we've missed. Mm-hmm. Or something that we put in that the community hates. So I think we need to build a little bit more time in there. I realize we have the budget process going at the same time, but we know the sort of the general theme, the general initiatives, the higher priority ones that are going to affect the budget immediately. But as far as the plan, I would give, before we have to officially approve it, I would want to have a little bit more chance for public input and for our input as well. I mean, and I can give you input on these 4 if you want that now, but then when those 8 more come to us in 2 weeks, it's going to take another couple weeks for us to give input on those. So
I would be more than happy to have a public comment period and to have the opportunity to record a video that walks through the pieces, and I would appreciate that.
I think that would be an excellent way to finish off the process. We've invested so much in it already.
Great.
So, thank you.
Just one clarification. So our time in our calendar or plan, is there a scheduled date for the vote on the strategic plan?
Originally, our goal was for you to actually have the draft in December and be voting an approval on it now.
Yeah.
That was the original timeline. I think, it has been better to slow the process down and to give the team time to think through it, to give us time to thoughtfully draft it. Some of our urgency was coming from wanting to have it for budget process, but I think in working on both at the same time, we know what we need to know, to Mr. Cardin's point, for next year. So slowing that process down and doing a little more community engagement, I think, doesn't necessarily interrupt.
Because I mean, I don't think well, I can't speak for everybody here, but I don't think it would be a major issue if we actually ended up having to, because of the time for public meetings and public forums, if we actually voted this after the budget was approved. I don't think it would be.
I don't think it would
Yeah, I don't think
matter.
it would be a major problem, at least from my perspective.
And we said year one was next year. Originally, some of our documentation had said we would start implementation in January of 2023, which is now. We are implementing parts of this now, but officially year one is next school year. So we have time.
And actually doing it after the budget is approved might not be a bad idea, because then you can adjust the time frame based on what's in the budget.
Mm-hmm.
So.
All right.
Sorry, I'm trying.
Or Dan
I'm
had a
taking
comment,
notes
didn't say
about the changing the date. So I'm sorry.
Dan, thank you for your work. You want to? Dan.
Can Dan come up front?
Yeah, I'm going to just say hello to everybody. I think it'd be good for, sorry. Ms. Exton,
No,
I didn't
that's-
go through the protocol.
Appreciate.
Yeah.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It was a real privilege, excuse me, to get to work with the district on this project. I can't tell you I mean, from our first conversation, Dr. Holman and I, it was really very, very clear that one of her non-negotiables was parents are going to really be part of this. Not just we're going to show them stuff and let them tell us what they think, and then we're going to go take their advice or not, but they're going to be part of writing it. And to me, that was like, this is why I want to work with you all. And I think that the strength of the result is, that is just one indication of why you ended up with such a strong result. It was a great group of people that were assembled, and great work by the staff.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all of the work that you put into this, and the writing of all the details and everything, you and Dr. Holman.
I'd like to note that a couple of the activities that Mr. Anderson did with the strategic planning team then later showed up in like initial building meetings for the schools and in like random workshops that administrators were leading. So it's been a nice way to sort of spread a few practices that are team building and that are helping us do the work that's outlined in the strategic plan. I would also like to say, if any of you have comments on any of the documentation here, I really would like you to send it along as soon as possible, because I'll use that in some of the reworking of the last 8 as well.
Mr. Schlickman?
Just as a point of order, Dan, would you identify yourself and the company you work for the record?
I'm Dan Anderson. The company that I work for is myself. I'm just a solo operation, and I formerly worked in the Boston Public Schools in a long time, and then at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for a couple of years, and then more recently am just doing work supporting districts and other state Department of Education and a little teaching in higher ed.
Okay. Just want to get the committee's sense. Do you think that we should have like a workshop the way we did with the mission and vision? And you don't have to answer me now, but if you can just give Dr. Holman and I feedback on, we want that kind of, not that much. Okay.
I don't know if workshop is the word, but I think certainly some sort of an open discussion where folks can ask questions of the superintendent and other folks involved in the process for clarity, and maybe get some sort of feedback response that would be something we could look at.
We spent a lot of time sort of wordsmithing and workshopping the vision and mission. I didn't know if that was something that.
Yeah, this is I think more complex, and I think that the responses we're going to want to hear from the community are more big picture. I mean, I was involved in the beginning, and we were wordsmithing in every word, because it was such a small document. Every word, every comma, every intonation really mattered. And this, it's really sort of a big picture thing. And if we can get people to look at it, read it, get on board, make any kind of reactions and suggestions, just building the community support behind this, I think, is a critical part of the process as we adopt it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dr. Holman. Superintendent's goals for school year 2022-2023.
Okay. So I have shared some this is a first read, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I've shared some draft goals with you. In Novus, I am required to develop a student learning goal, professional practice goal, and 2 to 3 district improvement goals for my evaluation for next school year. I have maintained a lot of the same focus indicators as adjusted, because I think I had taken them from a more granular rubric before, and Mr. Carden had adjusted to the superintendent's rubric that's posted on the website. So the focus indicators that I chose and aligned with each of the goals are listed down here. The only adjustment is that under instructional leadership, the student learning goal is aligned. I don't know that I had used that one last year. And I switched from a focus on environment as an indicator to HR management and development as an indicator, in part because of some of the work we're doing around strategic priority 2, linked to recruitment and retention. Other than that, I believe they are the same focus indicators that you evaluated me on this year. My student learning goal is to close opportunity and achievement gaps for students, continuing to focus on instructional practice and the work we're doing as a leadership team and as a whole staff, and on building inclusive classroom systems and structures. And there are some action steps for each one of these. Professional practice goal is to continue to develop an inclusive deeper learning practices across APS through my participation in new superintendent's induction, which is ongoing, the Deeper Learning Dozen, and other professional networks. The district improvement goal number 1 is to develop a comprehensive 5-year strategic plan for the district in collaboration with stakeholders, which we're well on our way to accomplishing. Improvement goal 2 is to recruit and retain excellent and diverse staff and continue to develop shared leadership structures that support continuous improvement, as we've been doing. And improvement goal 3 is to refine and improve collaborative, values-driven, visionary, and inclusive budget process and the systems required to sustain effective and efficient operations. Happy to take any comments or make adjustments to these.
Just to be clear, so this is a first read. Our second read and vote will be at our next meeting, and then these are the goals that will go through next October, the beginning of November. We would do our evaluation. Any questions or comments from the committee? Mr. Slocum?
I'm just saying that from the work we've been doing, nothing in here is a surprise. This is the work we've been collaborating with the superintendent on all along. I'm glad to have it documented in this form, and it'll be a good template for us to use when we do the evaluation in the fall.
All right, we will move on to school committee budget priorities, and we will, so I'm going to just move down the lines, just so the public knows. Throughout the fall, different schools presented their school improvement plans. At our last meeting, Dr. Homan and Mr. Mason presented many of the requests from the different departments within the system for next year's budget. And tonight, the AEA has presented their requests for the budget, and tonight is the school committee members' opportunities to present our priorities to the superintendent and her administration. Mr. Hayner?
I have nothing to add at this time.
Mr. Carden?
Thank you. So I expressed this at a budget subcommittee meeting, but I'll repeat it for the group. So one of my priorities is trying to address the hiring problems that we're having this year. And I don't know if that's, some sort of hiring bonus or some sort of year-end bonus or moving up the salary increases that we have in out years in our contracts. I don't know what would solve that, but I think running a district where there's 19 positions unfilled, almost halfway into the year, I don't know if maybe we've made some progress, to me is just problematic. So I think that's a problem that I would have put on high priority on. I agree with the teachers union proposal about the preschool positions. I think, to the extent we have funding, we should try to address that. We have some enrollment adjustments at the high school that we'll need to make if the enrollment that we're projecting actually shows up. I do think, given the attraction of Minuteman, we may not actually see much of an increase in the high school, so we'll have to maybe put those positions in reserve again and fill them as we see the enrollment numbers. But that's sort of what I see as the highest priorities. Thank you.
Ms. Morgan?
I think my issues are generally, I disagree with where some of these positions are placed. I don't think that a director of communication and family engagement is a non-negotiable. I think that should be up for negotiation. I think it can be a priority, but I think that, you know, there are a number of these positions that are around enrollment, which feels non-negotiable to me. We can't have 50 kids in French class, but I don't like the sort of morally imperative language.
We changed the language.
Oh, is that? I thought you did, and maybe I'm just reading one. I must be reading.
One that Michael sent.
I'm reading the one that Michael sent on January 10th. Is that not the right one?
We used priority 1, priority 2, priority 3 in the most recent version that we sent.
Okay, but that's what I thought. But I'm looking. Okay, well, it says morally imperative personnel here in the.
It's a footer that got missed.
Sorry.
All right, that's all I have. Thanks.
Mr. Slickman.
Okay, first question. In the budget additions, the DBEIJ is listed. I have no idea what a DBEIJ is.
So, when we created the director of DEI, at the same time, a lot of the scholarship around how we talk about DEI was shifting to include belonging and justice in that acronym. So DEIBJ is diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice.
Okay. If we could spell that out at some point.
Yes.
So that, you know, because the abbreviation is new to me. One of the things I tried to do was to compare the requested budget additions to the requests of the AEA, which I thought was a good set of requests. And in trying to cross-reference things that are there and aren't there, I'm a little confused, so I just want to see if I can't line it up. Now, the first page was shifting the TAs at Menotomy Preschool to SSPs. I did see that as 24-001 on page 1 of the document. Okay. Training for new paraprofessionals, this looks like a small number, so it may be too small to end up on the priority document that's something that we're funding as a matter of course.
It's a priority, yes.
It's something we intend to do, but it's not big enough to end up in this budget document.
That's a personnel list, yes.
Okay. The ELL support document here, I found the Unit A teacher 24-029, and I assume the 100 iPads they have there would be tucked into technology someplace that wouldn't be in this document, right? They said approximately $30,000 for 100 iPads.
Where?
The ELL support.
Yep, I just don't have that in front of me. I don't remember.
From the AEA. That's the kind of thing that wouldn't make this document, would be in our budget, and we're able to do that.
Correct.
It says $60,000 to $90,000 for 1.0 Unit A coach with 3 SSPs, 1 for Gibbs, 1 for Ottoson, 1 for AHS. Now, I think I was able to find one of these SSPs on line item 24-063.
So we have expanded EL staffing already this year. We've accelerated requests that were for next year, some of which were aligned with AEA, some of which AEA had added onto our requests. One of those was, I think, one of those SSPs, which was requested for OMS specifically.
Yeah.
We upped that from an SSP to a teacher,
Okay.
and we've already posted for it and are working on hiring for it this year. And then another one was Pierce, which we've posted for this year and are working on hiring for this year.
Yeah, the Unit A teacher of 24-029 was for Pierce.
Yep.
But they're talking about coaches or SSPs for Gibbs and Arlington High.
I believe the coach is on priority list 2, but I'm not sure.
Okay. And it's tough to figure out. They have the special ed support where they're requesting a district-wide support team 5 FTEs and a Unit C support 5 1.0 41-week Unit C people. Is that in there someplace?
Not included on those lists.
That's not included in any of the priorities?
It's not in the lists that you have there, no. We could include it, I suppose. We had not included that in the lists.
I mean, yeah, I'd sort of like to know that if we had this as a priority from your vision, seeing as a request, where it would fall in 1, 2, or 3.
I could get it into the lists.
Yeah, I'm looking at cross references. I have to say that the AEA presentation was so thoughtful. I want to be able to go and cross reference back and figure out where we are in terms of the priorities. And assuming the technology they're asking for, the 4-day training, 2 chargers per classroom, and 1 spare Chromebook, that's not going to be big enough to end up on this list.
Correct, because it's not personnel.
Right. I'm very appreciative of the hard work that has been done on this and the way it's been concatenated and prioritized. I'm sure that there was a lot of discussion among people in leadership in the district and the principals and the department heads in terms of getting this together. AEA was the folks who weren't probably in the room when this was being built, so that's the one thing that we really need to work hard to sort of place within this framework. And I have no problem with placing it where you think it's appropriate in terms of priorities so we can discuss it, but I do want to be able to cross-reference and see how the administration is responding to those requests.
Yep. Those were misses. I'm sorry. We'll get them in
there. That's okay. That's okay. This is first read, right? So, you know, it's all good. I'm really I know how difficult this is. Trust me, I know how difficult it is to put this kind of thing together. And I'm very appreciative of the work that went behind it. But I just want to look out for that. The other things that I'm thinking of is, of course, for personal priorities in terms of what my heart is. First of all, is making sure that we're making the necessary increases to compensate for enrollment, so that as the enrollment peristalsis moves up into the high school, that the resources are moving in that direction, so we're not sacrificing in terms of the student-teacher ratio and the content we're able to offer for our high school students. The other thing is that I really see the social emotional issues as being a priority, and I think we're under-resourced in terms of social workers, and that the focus is on needy group SPED, and I think that within the general population we really need to be supporting that, so that thinking of the levels of support we're giving to gen ed kids who are not an identified group, who still are encountering issues and crises in their lives that they bring into the schools. Thank you.
Mr. Thielman.
Thanks very much. So I do want to speak to a couple of the priorities that relate to the building project and the strategic plan. I think the one that Ms. Morgan referenced was the Director of Communications and Family Engagement. And let me also say that when you build a building, you don't always, meet all the goals of the building, operationalizing it and putting all the staff in you want. It takes time to do that, and I understand that. And I understand we're a committee and people take votes, and it lands where it lands. But the Director of Communications and Community Engagement, or Family Engagement, is an important position because, one, when we designed the building, we designed a welcome center in the new high school. Two, we envisioned a centralized system of welcome of people to the district, which we don't have right now. It's very decentralized, it's school by school. And when you centralize the system, you can actually ensure, the goal is to ensure that people have a similar experience, and that you're particularly sensitive to people who are new to the town and even new to the country who come to the district and don't really have any exposure to the American school system. So I do regard that as a priority. I'm glad it's priority one. I think it's a very important position. I also want to point out the building systems manager. I wouldn't call it a moral imperative, but it's a pretty important position to have, because we have to have someone operating all of the systems in the new school, and we would probably be letting down the taxpayers if we didn't have that position. That's a position that's important for maintaining the heating and all the complicated systems we have in there. There are other things that are important. I just want to point out the theater manager. We have a new expensive auditorium that needs complex management, and we knew that when we were designing the building, and so I hope that position survives. So there's also staffing that's listed for the cafe and the smart lab in the high school, and so I just want to point those out as things that are going to be helpful if they can be in this year's budget, but certainly over time, because they're going to allow us to maximize the use of the building that the taxpayers built.
Dr. Allison Ampe.
Thank you. So mine, rather than looking at line by line, I was thinking more holistically, and my main priorities are first to improve our teacher, paraprofessional, and other salaries. I think that has a lot of potential benefits in many ways in terms of hiring, increasing diversity. You know, it'll roll out and enabling some of our other initiatives. Second, ensuring that special education is appropriately funded and staffed. And third, that as we build our budget and add staff, that we're doing it in a sustainable fashion so that we can maintain it year over year. I understand that having the ESSER money may allow us to do some things that we may have to prune off the next year because the ESSER money doesn't continue. And that's, if we know that as we go into it, that's fine. I don't want us to be building a school system that we can't pay for the next year, or that we realize we made choices that actually we don't want to do the next year. So those are really my top three things for building as you push the budget forward.
So my number one priority has always been staffing for enrollment. So this year, it appears that AHS is the place where that potentially needs to happen. So, you know, whatever staffing increases need to occur at the high school for both general education and special education to keep class sizes down and meet the needs of the students there, the priority. Similarly, at the middle school, as the class that's at Gibbs moves to OMS, increasing staffing there to keep those classes down. I saw some numbers of 27 and 39, and that made me really anxious. So focusing on keeping those classes sizes down is also important. Similar to some of my colleagues, adjusting the title of the TAs at Menotomy to SSPs and adjusting their salary is something we've been having a lot of conversations about, and I want to make sure that we are able to make that happen. I also think that the Director of Communication and Family Engagement is something that we should put into practice as soon as we can. I think that a big focus for your tenure, Dr. Homan, has been in improving communication, and I think that you have done that, but that is not something that you can sustain while doing all of the other work that you are doing, and so I think it's important that we fund a position that can continue that role that you have taken on. Librarians, we've worked really hard to increase those slowly, and I don't want to see that stop. I would like us to get to a point where we have a librarian at every school. Mm-hmm. And finally, also thinking about the AEA's requests and the technology challenges around PowerSchool and data, and I don't remember all the details that Ms. Keys shared, but it feels like there is some kind of a need for some increased tech support. And that's what I've shared. Do you want to respond? You don't have to. It was our evening to share priorities.
I have taken some very detailed notes, and Mr. Mason and I, it's the first time we've provided priority documents quite like that. So the feedback has been welcome. Thank you. And we'll adjust how we sort of present that moving forward, make sure that all of the AEA FTE requests in particular are included in that. I think, we are thinking a lot about enrollment and about the strategic plan. And I would say a lot of the things that are on that priority 1 list, there are a lot of things that when we discussed as a cabinet team and talked with the principals and other administrators about, we're sort of in the middle of the priority 1 and the priority 2 list. It's very difficult to pare these down and make decisions about what makes it and what doesn't. And I think I share with many committee members the interest in continuing our work to improve salaries to be competitive with our neighbors, because I think that will help backfill some of our gaps and help us diversify and be competitive as well. So thank you. We will take these and work with them to refine some of our lists and to build a proposed budget.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, just one question to the chair. This document with the priorities was not put in Novus. It was presented at the budget subcommittee, so people can find it there. I'm wondering if there's an objection to putting it into Novus.
Would we be able to revise it just with some of the feedback we've gotten and make sure that we've gotten any footers that are missing out
the incorrect
and
titles.
then upload it? Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a budget page for the school committee in the website. We can tuck that there.
I think we can add it to Novus.
I would like to add it to Novus only because I don't want people misinterpreting the lists. I think it's not a complete budget document, and it's even earlier than you presenting your priorities. So,
well, we can put a revised version in for the next meeting and put what we looked at this meeting in Novus for this meeting.
That works too.
Ms. Morgan.
It's okay to ask. I get to ask questions,
Yeah,
right?
no,
I've said very little before.
Oh, yeah, no.
Okay, all right, just making sure. So when will we know about whether Mr. Bowler is going to have the Nordic ski team as part of his? Because I believe that was submitted as one of his budget requests. When we did the Alpine ski team in 2020, we took a vote on it here at this table, but that was because it was an addition, I believe, that was done after the budget had been approved. Okay. So if the Nordic ski team is part of Mr. Bowler's budget, then I don't think there's anything for us to do. But if it isn't, that's something I'd like to take up down the road.
Yeah. All right, look at me. Okay, so to respond, if I recall, the vote was more so for the fee, not necessarily the acceptance of adding it to the operating budget. Was the school committee was accepting and approving the fee structure based on what they were proposing as the budget for that particular program. We will probably likely include in our proposed budget of some level what the athletic budget department budget will be funded at. And I was speaking with Mr. Bowler about this particular program. He proposed his budget line items, which should include these the expenses to cover this program, and so it will likely be able to get funded. But if there's any reason why we have to make any adjustments throughout the budget process, as I explained to him, he has to look at his program as a whole now, right? And maybe he'll have to adjust other budgets, like maybe reduce some equipment that may be not as necessary to then maybe fit in another program. So we'll work through it, but figure out in the final proposal budget, we'll definitely make it clear if it gets through.
Okay. Do we usually include the detail around each sport in the proposed budget document that goes to the school committee, or no?
Well, in the many schedules, you can probably find it.
Okay.
But we don't normally
be explicit about whether it gets included. Yeah.
Mr. Thielman.
Thank you. So my question is, do we take a vote to add something as a varsity sport? Is that actually something we actually do here? Does anyone know? And then my follow-up question, if you have the answer, go ahead. But the follow-up question is, what is the cost of this new varsity sport? Do we know that?
I do not know.
Proposed cost, I mean.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a couple $1,000s. It
Okay,
wasn't.
so it
wasn't.
it feels like it's a small line item in a big budget, and I'm wondering if the actual decision to make a sport a varsity sport is at this table. I just don't know.
Is the personnel portion?
Well, I don't remember. You may have approved the stipend amount for the coach, and so what level of where in the stipend list it would go, but I don't know if that was actually a vote.
Dr. Alessandri.
I think the reason we approved the alpine skiing was to make it clear what our desire was in terms of we wanted there to be an alpine team.
I believe it was direction to the superintendent to do it, so
It
that we
wasn't
knew
so
she
much
would do it. I think, but I
Move
think
to direct the superintendent to make the alpine sport.
Anyway, it
the
wasn't
last thing we did before COVID. We did that.
Hey, you're right.
And that was it.
Yeah, and then we went on COVID. Let's be careful what we vote now.
You know where we approve it, believe it or not, is in the high school handbook, because that lists the varsity sports that we offer. So that if we add the alpine skiing as a sport as opposed to a club, it would be included in the handbook for students who are attending next year. So that'll be a revision. I have just one question, is that if we've got a club now and we're converting it to a sport, is there funding that we're putting in for the club that would offset the cost of adding it as a sport?
Well, you're talking about in this specific example?
In this specific example.
There's not a club being funded, to my knowledge.
So this is all being done on the side. And we'd be embracing and adopting it and making it an Arlington High sport. Okay.
Correct.
So we're going from $0 to a couple $1,000s.
And if I could address, like, the vote, I think there's a mechanism, though, that the principal has some level of autonomy to add clubs throughout the year.
Yeah.
And then it gets updated at the start of the next year. So this could very well, if it doesn't make the budget, get added at some point in the middle of the year, if they can fund it. But I'm sure it will be able to get funded.
Just to
Mr.
clarify,
Stalman?
so I'm sorry. To clarify, it sounds like we're going to, when we adopt the high school handbook, Dr. Janger will include, if he wishes, he'll include skiing cross-country skiing as a varsity sport in that handbook, and then we would vote yes on the handbook, and that would make it official. That's actually the vote. Okay, so someone should communicate that.
As well as we have to pay membership fees. I mean,
I know,
besides
that's
voting
what happens, you have to pay MA dues and all
the
that
actual
stuff.
aspect of that.
Yeah, there's a budget aspect to the whole thing.
We vote the budget, we vote to authorize the sport through the handbook.
To further complicate it, under Mr. Cardin's illustrious leadership in March of 2020, on the 12th, at 6:40 p.m., we had a vote to add alpine skiing as an AHS varsity sport. Maybe we didn't need to do that.
Is it in the minutes?
Yeah, it's right there.
I see the agenda item.
But again, there was not consensus.
Yeah.
That was as much direction as it was.
So it's
doing something.
It sounds like when.
Why don't we research it?
Well, I was going to say, it sounds like something that, if it makes it into the superintendent's budget proposal, if even in your presentation, you could just make it explicit that is part of what is included in the athletic fees, so that the public can.
We might need a separate vote. Let's research it.
Yeah. Okay.
That's fine.
I remember Mr. Cardin being very sure of himself during that vote, now that I think about it.
Now this conversation is going downhill.
All right. Anything else on school committee budget priorities? All right. ESSER 3 update. So that I know that the budget subcommittee has gotten ESSER 3 updates throughout the fall, but I had asked that this come to the full committee so that those of us that are not on the budget subcommittee.
Just to make it clear, many of the things on the budget subcommittee agendas are there so that if we have something to talk about, we can talk about them. Well, we don't always have any, a lot of them are like, no report. But if we don't have it listed, then we can't talk about it. So
at the November
8th meeting, apparently it was suggested that it be discussed here, so that's why it's on the agenda. Mr. Mason.
All right. Good evening, school committee members and members that are watching, or community members that are watching. Could provide a brief update on ESSER 3. And so just to remind everyone what ESSER 3 is, ESSER 3 was enacted from the American Rescue Plan Act back in March of 2021, about a year after closing. And the funds were mainly to be used for the safe reopening and sustaining of safe operations of our schools, as well as to address the academic and social, emotional, and mental health needs, with a specific portion having to be reserved for mental health support from the result of COVID-19. And so unlike the other funds, ESSER 3 required community engagement, and so hence why we are probably specifically doing this report as well, besides being requested. I also want to make note that in the monthly reports, there are ESSER 3 financials. I'm sorry if it's not as clear in the COVID section, but those are reported monthly. But for the main part of this is that when we presented the budget after soliciting feedback, there was a couple options that the administration presented. We got feedback to direct us in which ways to focus the ESSER funds. We ended up proposing to use ESSER to provide funds for equity audit and strategy development, teacher leadership and professional learning, engagement, mental health, and for school culture, which would cover the surveys, like such as panorama surveys, and acceleration and improvement of coaching models. And at this point, the total awarded amount, $1.1 million, we've spent about $179,000 of that. And in that, part of that is a literacy coach that, due to having the ability of the vacant positions on the general fund this year, we will likely amend the grant and make an adjustment to this proposed budget, or this current budget, to actually put that back onto the general fund for this year, since we have the room to cover it on the general fund. And I estimate that we will probably end somewhere at the end of the year with $900,000 to $950,000 available for ESSER 3 spending for fiscal '24. And so what we intend to do is try to use most of it on one-time spending, but for big items that we can spend in fiscal '24, and make strategic decisions that can be sustainable going forward. And so I open up to any questions that the committee may have, or Dr. Holmes.
I just want to add one thing to what he said. Everything we said we were going to do with the ESSER dollars, all of which was mostly one-time funding, we've done. We've just funded it off of the general fund because we've had the room to do so, and because some of those things were things that we wanted to be able to sustain over time, like a literacy coach, like a DEI specialist, which we weren't able to find last year but have reposted. So that is the challenge with these funds, is that we know they are one time. We don't want to put dollars on there that we hope to sustain over time, but we do have a few major projects that we might be able to place on those funds that are one-time projects coming up.
Mr. Hayner?
Is there an end date that if you don't expend it, it goes back to the government? Not that we're going to do that.
Yeah. Currently September 2024.
Thank you. I have faith in you that it will.
Dr. Allison Ampe?
So I'm just wondering, given all of this, I'm glad you have this statement in here because it reminds me. It says, in addition, Arlington Public Schools must reserve at least 20% of its ESSER funds to address lost instructional time through the implementation of evidence-based interventions and ensure that those interventions respond to students' needs and address the disproportionate impact of COVID on underrepresented student subgroups. And so I'm just wondering, how are we doing that?
Survey, wouldn't that be part of it?
Yeah, so I'd have to go back to the presentation we made originally when we had ours. There were like 3 options,
Right,
and we
right,
picked
but I'm
one,
saying-
and each one articulated how that option did that. So we chose the leadership work that we've done, the equity audit work that we've done. The equity audit's directly tied to identifying where those gaps are, and developing a plan for intervening in them.
Right, but I'm saying it's supposed to be 20%.
I would argue-
And if we've been able to fund this
I see
stuff
what you're saying.
off of it seems like we still have a
Yeah.
20% that we need to be showing. I mean, that's my reading of this.
Yeah.
And I am having a hard time taking what you're saying and making it match up with that.
Well, so how much of it have we spent right now?
So right now, we're at 179,000, and of that,
About 10% of it?
we had about, so I'm thinking about the equity audit was about $50,000, $40,000 to $50,000.
I would say that all of the initiatives we had planned to spend ESSER on were aimed at that. Like 100% of our plan was
Right.
to do that.
Right.
We've spent about 10% of it, so we need to
Right.
make sure that 10% more of it we can explicitly link to that effort.
And that we do the look back that shows
Yes.
that we've done all that. Okay,
Yes.
so we can talk about this more in budget, but I just
Yes.
feel like that's something else that needs to be in there as we plan the budget forward.
Yep.
So,
So in the budget priorities, there was a list of stipends for the ILTs, the instructional leadership teams. But there's still some here. Will you be using the ESSER funds for some of that? Will it be?
That's in ESSER? I thought that was on the AEF grant.
And I think we paid part of it was coming out of ESSER 3, and the other part was coming out of AEF grant.
So we did an expansion of those stipends this year. It sounds like we allocated some of that over to ESSER. A large portion was funded by an expansion of our AEF grant that expansion of the district improvement grant that we had that they granted us last spring. So yes, we will need to wrap that into budgets moving forward, but we could use, if we didn't fund that, for example, on next year's general fund budget, we could fund it as part of ESSER. It would go towards those goals that Dr. Alice Nampy was just talking about, and could account for some of that remaining 20%. Certainly wouldn't get us there.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Superintendent update.
All right. So this will be a short update. I wanted to provide a little more context around the mask recommendation that we still have in effect through tomorrow. I have every anticipation that we will be lifting this after tomorrow. The compliance with the mask recommendation has gone down. Estimating exactly where it's at is challenging. It's a moving target. Some students choose to wear their masks at certain parts of the day and not at other parts of the day. We have had a lot of compliance in instances where somebody might be feeling a little under the weather or slightly symptomatic or coming back from an infection, which has been very appreciated. Our absence rates before break were much higher than they have been after break. If you talk about a specific school site, for example, at one school, we had absence rates nearing the 30% mark before break, which is a dangerous rate of absence. It can really be a strain on a school community. At other schools, it was hovering a little closer to the 12 to 15% mark before break. After break, we've been between 8 and 10% absence with regards to staff. I'm talking about staff absence rates right now. I would have to pull student absence rates. They tend to mirror staff absence rates. When we have a different level of staff or student absence, that's an anomaly. That doesn't typically happen. Usually they're right on top of each other. So absence rates right now are around 10%. They are creeping up a little bit towards the end of this week, so we're going to keep monitoring that very closely, and if we see particularly high absence rates at a particular school, we might reinstitute a recommendation. The goal of the recommendation was to get everybody into the buildings and see where we were at, considering we were pretty strained before the break at some schools. The levels of COVID have started to turn around according to wastewater data, but we are still seeing some significant levels of infection of viruses, both COVID and non-COVID, in our schools, and are monitoring that. The CDC designation did move up to high, and we consulted with the local health department. That happened at the end of last week. And we talked with them over the weekend to determine whether we needed to up the recommendation to a requirement, and that was not something that they advised at the local level or for the schools at the time, so we stayed with the recommendation. Happy to take any questions about that the committee has once I'm done. The Arlington Public Schools Calendar Committee is continuing to meet. We've closed the survey that we had open for most of December. We had a meeting on Wednesday in which we looked at the data from that survey, which I will share with the school committee when I bring some proposed calendars forward at our next meeting. The recommendations from the committee are going to come to me next week, so I gave them the data and asked them each to prepare a proposal. Essentially, here's what I would do, here's what I would recommend based on the data that we're seeing. We did ask families about certain holidays that we currently have off of school because of our concern about our ability to operate on those days, as well as some questions about conferences, the timing of conferences, and how many to hold. We're considering some possibilities for public comment on the proposed calendars after we share them with you, and if we're deciding that's going to be necessary to engage the community and hear what their thoughts are on it, then I'll share that as part of the proposal that comes to you at the next meeting. Before school care, we are up and running at Pierce still and intend to be running through the remainder of the school year. Our attendance at the before school care program has struggled at the Thompson. We've only had a few drop-ins, and we've not had consistent enrollment to justify the staffing level from 7 to 7:30 in the morning. The breakfast program will remain open, effective at 7:30. But at the end of the month, we will likely be closing the before school care program at the Thompson due to low enrollment. This isn't to say that we wouldn't reopen it if enrollment were to be something people were interested in and we were to maintain the program through Pierce. We did do sort of a recall. Is anybody interested? Sign up now with the reduced rate that we had put in place earlier this fall, and we simply didn't have the signups for it. So we'll be closing the program at Thompson, continuing the program at Pierce, and I'm happy to have our coordinator come talk to you about how that's going a little later in the year. The program at Pierce has been pretty well enrolled. We have reduced the amount of staffing at that program because the enrollment is fairly low. It is below 10, and so we're able to staff that with a single staff member from 7 to 7:30 and then roll it into the breakfast program. We've wrapped the breakfast program and the staffing for that sort of into our programming through our food nutrition program. So the plus side of this is that we now have a system in which we are able to provide breakfast for students starting at 7:30, and all students are welcome for that, which is sort of a built-in before school care program, and something that we may think about expanding, moving a little bit earlier if this program, the way we conceptualized it, turns out not to be sustainable into next school year. So that's where we're at with before school care pilot for this year. The deputy superintendent search, I'm very excited to say that we completed our initial round of interviews. We interviewed 11 candidates from a very strong pool of candidates. Our finalists will be announced not by Monday, but tomorrow. I'm very much looking forward to announcing who the finalists are tomorrow. And we are scheduling the finalist interviews now. We have them all more or less scheduled on the 24th and 25th, unless something changes, of January. The finalist round is going to include 2 school visits for each candidate. They will visit with students, teachers, and administrators at that school. Each candidate will visit an elementary school and a secondary school. We will have afternoon and evening forums with teachers, administrators, and families, a visit with central office staff, and the finalists will present a task with the superintendent and assistant superintendents at the conclusion of the process. We will also, of course, conduct rigorous reference checks on all of the candidates. I am hoping to have a recommendation to the school committee on February 9th, or if necessary, sooner. In terms of looking ahead to next school year, K registration is opening on February 1st, and I will look forward to having additional updates about our plans for that and making sure that we're coordinating with our after-school care programs as well on a launch date for those to open up at our next meeting, and your enrollments are included in your materials. I'll take any questions.
Mr. Hayner?
When you look at the absenteeism, do you look back prior to COVID, like at this time of the year, do a comparison?
Yes.
How, is it still higher?
We've done that. I've done that analysis. I could easily share it with you. I haven't done the graphs yet for this year. Last year, what we noticed was it was significantly higher than pre-COVID all throughout the entire year, but it followed the same trends in terms of when students were most likely to be absent.
But you do look at pre-COVID for the flu and things of that nature this time of the year.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Schlickman?
I just wanted to note some good news. Today's report of COVID levels, and it dropped to medium for all Mass counties.
Right.
So we're going in the right direction.
Ms. Morgan?
Is your expectation on that, so, I mean, we ultimately have to vote on the assistant superintendent contract. So is your expectation that if we are interested in knowing about these folks, that we would come to the community forum? And if so, will Ms. Diggins make sure we get the information about that? Is that the...
Yes and yes, unless the committee would like me to arrange something else as part of the finalist process.
You don't think we should?
No, it's her position to hire. We can only deny it if
No, it's our position to hire. All assistant superintendents and superintendents. We can't fire. That's what the law says.
Yeah, the memo from 1995 after ed reform recommends that it's
superintendent must present. We can't hire on our own.
Right.
So, but we can deny her representation.
Yes.
Okay.
With cause.
No.
It says with cause, yes.
Well,
for good reason, it says.
For good reason.
Good
yeah,
reason.
good reason. There's a big difference. It's kind of close.
Yeah.
Ms. Diggins will make sure that the committee gets information about the community forums.
Yeah.
Mr. Thiemann?
Can you speak at all the trend of staff absences in the first couple of weeks of school?
Since we came back?
Yeah.
It was lower than I expected it to be when we came back. It was around 8% and hovered there for most of last week. And that is all staff, all absences, including like leaves, and including filled and unfilled. So I'm not including a breakdown of analysis of filled or unfilled. It crept up to around 9% at the beginning of this week, and it's been around 9% for most of this week.
And last pre-break,
pre-break, it was in the teens.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Allison Ampe?
I'm thinking it'd be nice if it's easier for kindergarten families to see on the website when kindergarten registration opens. I'm looking myself, and I think I found it, but I had to go through a few links, and they're even less familiar with the website than I am, and I know they're stressed. They're always stressed.
It's a good idea. Put a button on the front page somewhere.
Or just
for about a month. Yeah.
Dr. Herman, is breakfast supposed to be at 7:30 at all of the schools?
Yes.
Okay.
Tell me more about that comment later, maybe, if it's not.
I will follow up with you separately. Thank you. School committee meeting dates for school year 2023 through 2026. 2026. So this is the same. These are the same dates that were presented at the last meeting for our first read. I'll entertain a motion to approve the dates, and then if people want to have a discussion, we can do that.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Hayner, seconded by Dr. Allison Ampe, to approve the dates for school committee meetings for 2023-24, school year 24-25, and school year 25-26. Any discussion? All right, we'll take a vote. Those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That's unanimous. Those dates are approved. Consent agenda. All items listed with an asterisk are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a member of the committee so requests, in which event the item will be considered in its normal sequence. Warrant number 23145 in the amount of $28,584.34 dated December 28th, 2022. Warrant number 23157 in the amount of $334,964.65 dated January 11th, 2023. School committee meeting minutes December 1st, 2022. School committee meeting minutes December 15th, 2022.
Move to approve as presented. Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Hayner, seconded by Mr. Thielman. Those in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That motion passes. All right, subcommittee liaison reports and announcement. Budget, Dr. Allison Ampe.
Thank you. So we met actually twice since we last met here, first on December 20th, then on the 6th of January. Our original topic for discussion was planning in response to the long-range planning meeting that happened on the 16th of December. At that long-range planning meeting, there had been different ideas regarding the potential timing of an override, including both spring 23 and spring 24. So we had originally thought we would need to be thinking about what we thought would work best for the schools. However, since December 20th, additional information had came out regarding the timing and necessity for that suggests that the override will need to happen this spring. So at budget, we pivoted to begin discussing the ramifications of a potential override and how we felt the schools, what the schools thought about this. We will be continuing this discussion next week on Tuesday, and you folks are all welcome to join us. But in the meantime, at this point, our thinking is to request an additional lump sum. Okay, we haven't figured out all the parameters, right? This is just the start. But we want to request additional funds so that we would be able to put money into the staffing, into the lanes and steps, so that our teachers would be at a much more comparable level of salary to the town manager 12 than they are now. And we're working, Dr. Holman and Mr. Morgan are working on what that's going to look like in terms of the amount, and this will have to go through, we haven't even talked about this at long-range planning yet. That our next long-range planning meeting is on the day after budget, so it's on the 18th. So we will be discussing this more, but I wanted to let you folks know and see if there's anyone who has a problem with that idea, or I'm not seeing any problems.
I don't have a problem with that at all. I think the reality is that with the housing costs in this area going up and our teachers living further away and teachers having to commute through towns that pay significantly more than we do in order to get here, we are in a difficult position. It's only going to get worse. Bringing our salary scale to be competitive with our neighbors, particularly communities to the west that our teachers are driving through to get here, is really an essential thing if we're going to maintain the quality of staff that we have.
Okay. Mr. Thielman.
Yeah, so my question is, the timeline would be that the long-range planning committee would make a recommendation to the select board on the amount of the override. We're represented on that committee by a couple of people here. Are you okay? And then you all are representing us in that negotiation. I understand. Okay. And the timeline for that decision would be March?
They don't have to put it. Okay. The bottom line is the number probably needs to be finalized within the next month or so.
Yeah. Okay. And
then, but the rest, the actual mechanics of it is later.
Yeah, I understand.
But yeah, the number needs to probably be finalized
by March.
The next month or so.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Keep us posted. Good luck.
We're going to ask for what we need.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, and what?
It's our job.
Yeah.
Makes people feel uncomfortable, then we just sit there and wait.
Yep.
Community Relations, Mr. Hayner.
First, I'd like to thank Ms. Morgan and Mr. Cardin for hosting the community chat this past Tuesday. Second, there's a need to have an additional school committee member to join Mr. Schlickman for the next school committee chat on January 28th. I'll be sending out a sign-up sheet in the next several days. Normally, I would fill it, but I have a date to participate in the polar plunge that date and time. Thank you.
Curriculum, Instruction, Assessment, and Accountability, Ms. Morgan.
No report.
Facilities, Mr. Thielman.
We're probably going to have a meeting sometime in early February to get an update on the conversation we had. We have everyone knows we met on, I already reported on this, we met on December 12th, I reported at our last meeting. And just to refresh everyone's memory, the town was going to do some work on some of the buildings, address some of the issues. We'll get a report end of January, we'll meet in February. Stay tuned.
Can I just
Dr. Homan?
add on, because something came up earlier in the meeting about, well, mice appears, that we are very actively working with the town to resolve that challenge. We are aware it is a frustration for the teachers and families there. Jim Feeney and Rob Barrett, facilities director, were at the building today working with the administration there to identify where the larger areas of activities are and do some intensive trapping there overnight tonight and through the weekend, and figure out whether we need to do some more intensive mitigation strategies and make sure we're going down the list that Health and Human Services told us to do for plugging up external holes. So I just wanted to note that that's very much on the radar and being taken care of.
Got it.
Policies and Procedures, Mr. Schlickman.
No report.
High School Building Committee, Mr. Thielman.
No report. We're doing great.
Superintendent Evaluation, Mr. Cardin.
No report.
Liaison Reports. Announcement, Mr. Hayner. Sorry.
Dr. Holman came and presented the concept of shared leadership to the Arlington Rotary yesterday. She was clear and concise. She answered all their questions, which impressed them more. The members wanted me to let you all know how fortunate Arlington is to have her as our superintendent.
Thank you.
Very good.
Future agenda item, Mr. Schlickman.
I was talking to Michael Ruderman, who's the school committee member representing Arlington at Minuteman. A lot of districts have an annual meeting in which they invite the superintendent and school committee members representing the community to the K-12 meeting. And they're a player for us. They've become an even bigger player since they've got a new building. And it would probably be good for us to invite them for a little 15-minute presentation and discussion. So we get to know the new superintendent, and we can have questions that pertain to Arlington education addressed within this format. So I'd like to ask that they be given an invitation to one of our meetings.
They meaning the superintendent and
the superintendent and Mr. Ruderman, yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. This is commonly done elsewhere.
Yeah. Ms. Morgan.
Just on that, not necessarily within the next 2 months, but I know when Mr. Cardin was chair, we had Lab come in, and they have new leadership since then, who we haven't met. They didn't come in when I was chair. I mean, there was a lot going on.
Nobody came
for all of
anywhere
us.
when you were
Nobody
chair.
came anywhere, but between you and, but in the next 6, 8, 12
Lab
months,
is on the draft. It would be after my term as chair is finished, but it is on the draft committee calendar for this school year.
Perfect.
Did you want to add something, Dr.
No, she started on July 1st, and they did that search last year. It would be great for you all to meet her.
We're doing a lot of reminiscing about Mr. Cardin's term as chair. It was very long. It was very long. It never ended. And,
all right.
Yeah, it's tough.
Okay. I will now entertain a motion to enter into executive session to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with union and/or non-union personnel or contract negotiations with union and/or non-union in which, if held in an open meeting, may have a detrimental effect. To conduct strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation in which, if held in an open meeting, may have a detrimental effect. Collective bargaining may also be conducted.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Hayner, seconded by Dr. Allison Ampe. Roll call vote. Mr. Hayner?
Yes.
Mr. Cardin?
Yes.
Ms. Morgan?
Yes.
Mr. Schlickman?
Yes.
Mr. Thielman?
Yes.
Dr. Allison Ampe?
Yes.
And I vote yes. That's unanimous. We're now in executive session. We're back from executive session. Next on our agenda, we have a possible vote to approve a memorandum of agreement with AEA Unit C from July 1st, 2022 to June 30th, 2025.
And authorize.
And authorize the chair to sign it.
So move. Second.
Motion by Mr. Hayner, seconded by Mr. Thielman. Any discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Hayner?
Yes.
Mr. Cardin?
Yes.
Ms. Morgan?
Yes.
Mr. Schlickman?
Yes.
Mr. Thielman?
Yes.
Dr. Allison Ampe?
Yes.
And I vote yes. That's
Motion to
unanimous.
adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Schlickman, seconded by Mr. Hayner to adjourn. Mr. Hayner?
Yes.
Mr. Cardin?
Yes.
Ms. Morgan?
Yes.
Mr. Schlickman?
Yes.
Mr. Thielman?
Yes.
Dr. Allison Ampe?
Yes.
And I vote yes. This meeting is adjourned.